Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the kickoff of the 2020 International Mandela Effect Conference. I am Jerry Hicks, the father of IMEC, if you will, and we are very, very excited and proud to have every last one of you here with us. We cannot wait for this amazing week, guys. 15 speakers, 6 days, one event. We are so proud to be able to bring this to you, even though 2020 has been so wild and crazy. We have got the number one place to be this week. I guarantee you that. But before we begin, we do have a little disclaimer. The content you are about to watch is meant for thought and consideration. Please be respectful of each other and opinions shared. This is a safe space to express thoughts, ideas, and information. The views and opinions expressed by individuals in the following program do not necessarily reflect those of every speaker of the IMEC organization or its affiliates. P.S. The Mandela effect is real. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, in a couple moments, we will be bringing on our keynote speaker, Miss Regina Meredith. So please sit back, relax. We will be right back.
First of all, let me just tell you a bit about myself. I've spent my entire career in the media, starting out as a sports anchor back in the days when there weren't any. I was first of literally 3 or 4 female sports anchors, and ultimately went on to becoming a news anchor, which is when I found out that I didn't care for the top-down structure of how information was passed through to the viewer. I really did not enjoy that job at all. At that time, and it holds true to this day, if there was good news, it was pretty much blocked out unless you had maybe a warm and fuzzy human interest story at the end of the show. But by and large, it was a dose of bad news night after night, and I was part of dishing it out to the public just before they went to bed at night. It really took me down physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And that's the time when I began searching for other ways of viewing life, and my spiritual journey really began. This was about 35 years ago when I finally entered into what I would call now my life path. And that's when I decided to start using the media for the purpose of disseminating information that I found to have higher value, not the normal if it bleeds, it leads type of thing. So I went on to do environmental reporting, documentaries, news segments within progressive television shows. And then, of course, by 2004, which is bringing us through my career very quickly, after a long stint at PBS and doing Regina's Vegetarian Table, which I did because it was fun, I love food, and I had written a couple of cookbooks. My former husband and partner and myself started Conscious Media Network, and that was in 2004. And that was the beginning of video streaming of this kind of information that we're seeing, all of these amazing presenters at this conference. Those are the people that I chose to give a platform to instead of the bad news of the day. In addition to that, I had been developing my own understanding of the nature of reality, science, and spirituality. I was very interested from an early age in quantum physics, for example, as a means of contending with the nature of spirituality. So this has been my passion for a very long time. And also for the last few decades, I dedicated my skill set of media, both hosting shows and also interviewing people, to uncovering the truth behind the nature of reality in a myriad of subjects. So that brings us up to speed and where we are today. So as far as the Mandela effect goes, I had first learned about it from Cynthia Sue Larson, who I just adore as a human being. I've interviewed I don't know how many people. It's probably certainly topped over well over 1,000 by now. And I have to say that Cynthia, I find to be one of the purest hearts of any person, especially in the scientific community, that I've ever interviewed. And because she has this incredible background in science, as well as this pure heart, I was very interested in how she was experiencing what is called the Mandela effect. So I invited her on Gaia TV. At this point in time, I do interviews for both Gaia Television and also for my own site, reginameredith.com. 50-50. I do equal numbers of interviews for both sites, and I've interviewed Cynthia on both sites. So if you would like to check into our past conversations after this conference is over, you can go to Gaia or reginameredith.com and look at our conversations as a little bit more background on this extraordinary woman and what she's bringing forward to the public. And so, I mean, initially, I resonated with virtually every example that was given. We had all of the kind of old commercials and new commercials, graphics pop up side by side, and I immediately said, yes, of course it was Berenstein Bears. Of course it was Jiffy Peanut Butter. Of course it was Stouffer's Stovetop Stuffing. I remembered all of that from my youth, and there was no question that I had the memory of these things, as with millions of other people. So as she was explaining to me, she said, go check it out for yourself, right? So that began my journey about the sheer quirkiness of these mundane incidences where reality had empirically shifted. So we enjoyed our interviews, and ultimately the time came, she was putting together this conference and invited me to speak because I've done a number of commentaries on the nature of the mind, for example, a user's guide to the mind, a user's guide to reincarnation, which is a new series of things I'm doing now. And so she was resonating with me, I was resonating with her, and we decided to pool our understandings of reality together to do this presentation today. So first of all, I have to tell you that it was just this morning I woke up after dreaming about doing this presentation. I kept going back to one of the examples that Cynthia used, and it was the portrait of Dorian Gray, a portrait of Dorian Gray, written by Oscar Wilde back in 1890. I was fascinated with this because I thought, okay, this is something that is of historical record. We can certainly go back and look at this and see that indeed it was titled A Portrait of Dorian Gray. So first of all, I started asking classically educated people that I know, mostly people over 45, 50 years old who would have encountered this literary piece of work. And I said, what do you remember by way of the name of the book by Oscar Wilde regarding Dorian Gray? And virtually, I think it was without exception, everyone remembered it being A Portrait of Dorian Gray. I thought, yeah, that's how I remember it. So I was online researching, thinking somewhere I have to be able to find an archival copy of A Portrait of Dorian Gray. Well, as I was going through, an odd thing happened. One page on the search engine popped up and populated with one link after another to A Portrait of Dorian Gray. And now, previous to this, I had been encountering no luck at all. Actually, all I could find was a picture of Dorian Gray. And I thought, no, this isn't right. I kept on. I had the will to keep looking until I could find something that proved that A Portrait of Dorian Gray ever existed, even going into private collections of older works that people had. So here I was, voila, up popped an entire search page of A Portrait of Dorian Gray links. And I was just thrilled. Unfortunately, thinking I'd hit upon something, it did not occur to me in the moment to do a screen capture of it, or I would show it to you right now. I don't have the screen capture. So now we get down to that argument. Oh, well, was it just in her head? Did she imagine this? I do not believe I imagined this. I saw it with my eyes. I was so excited. I clicked on one of the links, and boom, it took me right to a picture of Dorian Gray. And I was never able to go back. That was an anomaly for that one moment in time. After that, every search I did only showed a picture of Dorian Gray. So I even went to bookstores and thought, oh, I found one. But when they shipped it to me, it wasn't. It was a picture of Dorian Gray. And I thought, rats. So I started thinking about this, and this was really what was occupying my mind when I woke up this morning. What actually had happened in this case? we can talk about Stofers and other things, but I think we can hit upon some of the practical elements just looking at this one little scenario that I've had. And this isn't a bizarre one. You're going to hear a lot of bizarre scenarios. You're going to hear amazing stories from Cynthia, also from Jan Ingle-Smith, actually from almost every presenter on their experiences with the Mandela effect. My interest is truly looking at the mechanics of it and what this can bring to our realities by way of function, by way of something that serves humanity. So that's the angle I'm coming in on. So I started thinking about it. What happened here? Did I drop into, for one moment in time, a parallel reality, perhaps the parallel reality in which the portrait of Dorian Gray existed at one time? And now we've shifted over to another reality where it's now a picture of Dorian Gray? Or is it possible that something even more bizarre may have happened in which the will and power of my own thoughts were able to rearrange the assemblage of ones and zeros on that page to provide what my mind and will wanted to see, which was a page of links with a portrait of Dorian Gray? This is where we begin implicating the mind in it. And this is where a lot of my interface with the Mandela effect has happened. And we'll start looking at that in a little bit. I want to share a few examples of things that have happened in my life, but I don't really want to center on that and focus on that because you're going to be hearing a lot of it, much more extraordinary stories from some of our other presenters. So what I thought I would do first is, after asking those questions, did my mind actually create a new outcome that became manifest physically in that moment? Or did I drop in for a moment through desire to this parallel reality in which a portrait of Dorian Gray existed? These are questions that apply to virtually all of the incidents in our life that have to do with this ubiquitous and incredible question that will not be answered probably for centuries to come, which is truly, what is the nature of time, space, matter, and reality, and how does that interface with mind? First of all, science hasn't actually figured out what mind is yet. They're finally on a quantum level understanding that mind is something that is not inside the brain, and the brain is just a processing unit for it. The mind seems to be something so much more interconnected and vast that it's perhaps beyond our human understanding still at this moment, other than simply theoretically, or we can drop in and use it in practice, but it's hard to put into words. So from this, I think it's important that we understand, we already know time is malleable. This conference is going to prove this again and again. A time is more of an infinity loop, and it folds back in on itself. And many people believe that by healing the present now, we can also heal the past, or we can go back into a perceived or remembered past life, heal that event, and have that have knocked on effects for generations forward. All of this is certainly entirely possible and may be what we do, even unconsciously. But let me tell you about one interesting little story that happened. I was actually researching a book before interviewing Andrea Perron, who wrote House of Darkness, House of Light. In her book, Andrea detailed all of the strange incidents that happened in her haunted house back east growing up, in which there was one main, what we call poltergeist, a woman who had occupied this house before, who was obsessed with her father in this life and came through using electricity, energy of all kinds, and causing a lot of damage to her family. But there was this one very touching moment in the book that I found fascinating. And it was one in which her mother, who was the primary victim of the entities in the house, they really did a number on her. She was standing in her dining room in this old house. And as she was there, suddenly she started seeing into the life of a family who had lived there a couple hundred years before, roughly a couple hundred years before, their furniture, what the room looked like at that time. And the interesting thing of it was The woman who was sitting at that table with her family saw her mother in this timeline and turned around and looked at her, and the two women simply looked at each other. Can you imagine what that was like from either perspective, looking through time like that in the same moment? So again, I think that's just one teensy example of gazillions of them in which time isn't exactly as we see it. But also, matter isn't what we see. If you were to look at the human body on a quantum level, it would look something like, if you say even an atomic level, it would be something like looking at the solar system. And so here we have a number of planets within the solar system. Say, we'll compare it with the elements just so we can get into the atomic model. For example, nitrogen has 9 electrons. So say we were looking at our solar system and it had 9 planets that are orbiting around the sun. Well, it would be very similar to the 9 electrons orbiting around the nucleus in an atom. So you've seen models of this and what this looks like. There's nothing there. It's all space. Our body is made up of atoms. So looking at us on a quantum level, there is nobody here. It is as though we're looking out into the solar system itself and looking at our planets studded throughout the solar system. Forget all the other stars and everything else. They're just the planets. There's nothing there. We are nothing but space. Now, Tom Campbell, the author of My Big Toe, which is My Big Theory of Everything, is a scientist who dealt with a lot of out-of-body experience reporting at the Monroe Institute in his youth. He went on as a quantum physicist to start explaining the nature of reality. And he's saying that essentially what we see here is an agreed-upon rendering of reality. So we have all incarnated here over time. What we're seeing and experiencing, we all understand what a door is, essentially. So a door becomes something rather stable in our field that we can all recognize as a door. We can recognize each other and the features on our faces and such as a thought that has become concretized into an agreed upon reality of sorts. So when you stop and think that there's actually nothing here in our world, even the most dense of atoms, one of the densest atoms is polonium, which has 84 electrons. Still, imagine our solar system, looking out and you see 84 planets. That's nothing. It's still all space, yet polonium is so deadly it can kill you by just having just a few particles of it introduced into the body. It'll kill you. So the nature of reality, the nature of material reality is something that continues to fascinate me and also confound me on so many levels, because we have our concrete understandings of what it means, what everything that is surrounding us means, what these bodies mean, and so forth. So if we start looking at our reality as though we're all space and time is malleable, then you can see that thought ends up taking on this incredible position, because all creation comes from thought and desire of some kind. There's nothing that exists around you right now that didn't come from a person's desire to have a particular thing manifest, and the thought that preceded that allowed them to even come up with the idea to begin with. It could be the piece of technology that you use every day. It could be a food. That something that creates on such a vast scale has created that we can't even conceive of what it's like to create a planet and all of the food sources, plants, trees, herbs, insects, life forms. Can you even fathom the incredible creative capacity it takes to create something like Earth and all of its life forms? And yet it's been done. It's not random. A rose is not random. So we look at the incredible creative capacity of mind at a level that we don't comprehend. And if you look at it from the tradition of the Hermetics, or even, the great sage Sri Aurobindo, who preceded Gandhi, everything was mind. The world is a mental construct. And it doesn't mean it's not filled with spirit and passion and love and all of that. It is. But It's still a construct of someone's or something's thought. So when we start looking back to the Mandela effect again, I started thinking, okay, so how is it that, for example, Stouffer's stovetop stuffing, I think even the comedian David Chappelle used to joke about it in one of his skits, that he liked going over to his white friend's house because the mothers would serve Stouffer's stovetop stuffing, right? And you can go into the internet, you're going to be hearing about this later, you can go to the internet and start looking at all the debates about whether it existed, and it says, no, it never existed. It was Kraft stovetop stuffing. That's not how I remember it. It's not how millions of housewives remembered it. Okay, so is it possible, not just that there is a parallel reality in which Stouffer's made as stovetop stuffing, but is it possible that whoever made that change when Kraft absorbed Stouffer's and decided to change the name to their own stovetop stuffing, Kraft stovetop stuffing, they did their new graphics, they made a corporate decision that they were going to rebrand it. So they put some intention, some will, some energy inside this decision, into this decision, started popping it out onto the marketplace. Now you can't find any evidence. You can't find the wrappers, the original wrap packaging of Stouffer's stovetop stuffing, even though this lives and is very well alive in millions of minds around the United States and possibly even elsewhere. Is it possible that the sheer act of creativity, thought, and will literally overwrote that reality? It erased it in a truly empirical, historical context. It's gone. It never existed if you're to look it up in anything in a tangible way through the internet or any physical means. So this is really where I find the Mandela effect interesting, is the power and interface of the human mind on altering what we even perceive as reality and history itself. So what are some of the potentials that are stunning in terms of their use, in terms of instantly altering a reality? Well, one of them is instant healing. I've been very fortunate to have participated in what is called instant healing, both as a receiver and as a facilitator. And I know what it took by will of my own mind, conjoined with another person's openness and soul openness to having a healing experience. It's never just one way. You can't impose healing upon another. So there has to be agreement between the two people. And that's something, if you'd like to hear more about that, in the Gaia archives, I did a few interviews with Stephen Ross, and also on my own site at reginameredith.com. He is an amazing facilitator of instant healings on people, but he talks about how this happens, what the nature of it is. It can only happen in agreement between these two people. So you have a being, a soul, who's open and saying, yes, I want a different outcome. I want to be healed. You have the experience of the facilitator, who has to have very, very clear thought, very powerful will, and a precise, in this case, a very precise desired outcome, which is going back to this state of perfection before the disease occurred. That is a past reality. You can literally, using the technique he does and I've used, you can collapse those two in a flash and the person has healed. Now, Jen Ingalls Smith and I were talking about this one day after I interviewed her, and she was saying that she believes that is an alternate or a parallel reality. You have the parallel reality that happens at the precipitation of emotion and thought, which can literally have a person begin taking on imbalances and become ill. And then you can have the alternate one where other choices were made, other thoughts and emotions were inhabited, and you have the well version of the self. And to me, what's so fascinating in this, and I expect by the end of this conference you're going to feel the same way, once you start diving down this rabbit hole of the Mandela effect and the nature of reality and parallel timelines, etc., there are always more questions that are going to be raised than answered. And that's appropriate, because what's so wonderful about this is you get in because you think, no, I remember stuff for stovetop stuffing. It's just kind of fun. Poke around in the internet and say, oh my God, I can't find it anywhere. So it's a little hook for us to come in a rather mundane but fun way. But once you start pulling the thread of it, you have to keep going. And this is not something that if you're a curious and open-minded person, it's not an itch that's going to be satisfied quickly. It's going to create many, many more, I think, engagements. Engagements is the best word. We'll want to engage on every level possible. So when I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, okay, here we go. Instant healing. What is that? Is that a change from the mind of an outcome? Have you just taken something and immediately affected the physicality of the being? As we know, there's almost no physicality to us. It's really just some atoms, right? Or have we actually dropped into an alternate timeline of a parallel reality based on different thoughts and experiences of this person and their expression? And I'm going to leave that. Cynthia is going to talk a lot about this. I've had a couple really kind of quirky experiences that have happened myself, and I've asked the same question. I'll share one with you. Just because it's a little more dramatic than a couple of the more mundane ones that I've been through. But this was in the mid-90s in Paris. And I was there with my son. We were there to go to a friend's wedding outside of Lyon. And as we were in Paris, and we stayed in the same area that I had stayed in many times before, the Latin Quarter, we were out doing some sightseeing that day, came back, started our trek back home at the end of the day, and went down into the metro, which is their public transport system of trains underground. We went down to the metro, and this is a metro system I was very familiar with. I had not, there and London, I had never had any kind of boo-boos where I'd gotten on a wrong train before. I knew the system pretty well, and I was in familiar territory. So we were hot and tired, sweaty. It's August, it's the end of the day. So we go down to catch the train, and I saw the sign, and I followed the sign, and boom, went over to the platform to catch our train. About a stop away, I realized that I had gone the wrong direction. And I thought, that's impossible. I saw the sign. I saw the sign. I know this system. I saw the sign. That's impossible, right? Well, I'm just arrogant enough to think that, because I've had so much repetition in that system and being on those very stops. And I was sure that I had seen that. So I think, okay, let's go and let's hop off this thing. We hopped off, ran over across to another platform, got back to where we started so that we could catch the train we needed to go on a couple more stops to our stop. And as we were kind of running along, actually trying to make the train, just as we were literally a couple foot lengths away, as we were running in to get that car, the doors closed and we missed the train. I thought, oh, rats. You know, I just wanted out of there. It was hot. So we missed the train. So we waited and waited. And now it's really hot. It's packed with commuters because this was at the end of the day. It's very hot there and muggy down in the system in September because the people kept piling up and no trains were coming. So finally there was an announcement on the overhead, and everyone gasped. And my French isn't good enough to understand. They were speaking too fast. I'm very rudimentary at French. And so I asked someone, what happened? What did they say? And they said, the train that just left just blew up. Well, this made the news all over the world that night. It was a famed event in French history where they were having some acts of terrorism with an Algerian faction at the time. So the train blew up. A lot of people died, a lot were injured. And it was kind of surreal going upstairs, leaving there, and just kind of watching how events occur when you're at the epicenter of an event like that. And some of you have been at these kinds of events, maybe even at 9/11, which is certainly much more dramatic even than this. But the thing that scratched at me, my head, is I know I saw that sign correctly. And whatever happened, whoever did this, whatever tricked me, whatever I dropped into, thank you, thank you, thank you. It saved our lives, literally. And that's not the only time that these kinds of things have saved my life. I've had other near deaths and that sort of thing. But this one was interesting because my mind was definitely involved. And I say, I know what I saw, but couldn't be what I saw, or this wouldn't have happened. So what happened there? Did something come in because of my own familiarity with it and just trick me into seeing it? Did I drop into another reality? Again, I would ask you to, when we do our panel after this, let's open these questions up and talk about what actually could have happened in that kind of situation. And then there are the mundane things like I call them the little Pixie events, where I'll lose something. And in this one case, this happened twice actually in my office at Gaia. Literally twice. One time was a gold earring. I was changing in there to do a show, and my earring had come off and fallen onto the ground, and I didn't recognize it until I had gotten back to my hotel that night. And I thought, no, it fell off there, because I could kind of feel it catching on something. So I went looking for it the next day. It was gone. And I had the janitor keep an eye out for it. He vacuumed every single day. No, I talked to him through this. Months went by, and I just forgot about it over time. And then one day I walked in, and there it was, sitting right in the middle of the office, literally in the middle of the floor. You couldn't not see it. And I said, Bob was the janitor there. Bob, did you put this back here? Are you fooling around with me here? He said, no, I just vacuum every day. So this happened again with another little item that was on my desk at Gaia. It disappeared, showed up in the exact spot again a little bit later. These little Pixie events, I call them, I almost feel like it's elementals from some other domain that kind of fool around with us and just play little jokes on us. So it's possible that's happened, or it's possible that this is something that had dropped into a different reality and then popped back into this one. I don't know. But I find these things fascinating looking around us at society right now, because what we're seeing is such an incredible split, in people's psyches and our perceptions of life and our remembrances of life. And I don't think that there's been anything for lifetimes, honestly, lifetimes, that compares to what happened to this planet when COVID was introduced in 2020, or arguably late 2019. The events it spun into motion and what it did to people's psyches, it is every version of a Hollywood film imaginable. What it spun off later in terms of tensions, what it spun off in terms of behaviors that led to racial protests around the planet that were long overdue to be done in a way that could finally be embraced by everybody to say, this has to stop. This has to stop. This has gone on for hundreds of years. It's just flat wrong. We can't do this anymore. But why did it take until now for that to become so painfully obvious? On the other hand, you have people who, if you chose the path of fear, and it wasn't as though there was nothing to be concerned about or fearful of. I'm not one of these people saying that COVID is a hoax. It's real. And it has some really weird constituents to it genetically. It's not something you want to encounter, especially if you're an older person with a lot of underlying conditions. But for young people, it seems to have virtually no effect, very, very little. People who are generally healthy, a 113-year-old woman overcame it, 103-year-old woman overcame it. How come they did, or someone else in their 50s may have died due to the clotting effects of this strange, peculiar little viral beast? So again, This is real. We have reason to be concerned. No country knew exactly how to deal with it. Asia had a little more heads up because of SARS in the past. So we learned about things like concepts like social distancing, right? We shut down our economies almost completely, save for grocery stores and in Costco and gas stations. Everything was pretty much closed. And that had, I think, a particularly unusual impact on the Western countries, most specifically the United States. The people of the United States have been groomed over time to be more consumers than citizens. Everything that we're told to do has to do with consumption of something. All the messaging coming in is consume, consume, consume. I think the animated film Wall-E addressed that very nicely. And then, of course, the kind of D-rate John Carpenter film They Live, which is a favorite of David Icke, for example. He loves that to explain how reality actually functions. But, you know, we're looking at these films about this messaging, but all of them have to do with conformity, also to do with consumption. Now suddenly we're in a position where we can't consume. We can't go to a cafe with friends. We can't go to a movie. We can't go buy a new pair of shoes. This created a need to have to respond to that in our psyche to try to assemble our reality around it in one way or another. And some people went into just a very protectionist mode of staying very close, staying away from people, fearing other. That would be a natural extent of this. And others said, no, I don't want to do that. That does not feel right to me, and just denied the whole thing. And then you have those people in between. But each one was creating their own show, their own reality, their own movie about what this was. And this is something that is fascinating to me on a number of levels, because it's almost as though society has been unhinged from any kind of verifiable, objective truth. And the media did their part in creating mass confusion, so you were left to figure it out for ourselves. You choose your reality, and that's going to become your reality. But we're in this interesting, peculiar phase of time when all of this happens, a larger phase of time that Carl Kalaman, who does work with the Mayan calendar, refers to as waves of consciousness, the ninth wave of consciousness, which is available to all of us now. So when you look at the Mayan calendar and you look at Hermetic texts and you look at the Vedas, we have cycles of consciousness like this, right? Waves of consciousness. Some people say, no, it's really more, you take it and turn it on its side, it becomes a spiral of consciousness. The way that Carl Kalaman depicts it is we have been in the sixth wave of consciousness, which is the patriarchy, religion, structure. We look at it now and think, okay, enough already, because it led to the oppression of a lot of ideas, a lot of people, and so forth. But it also brought into the world technology and a lot of other things that came from living primarily masculine, left brain dominant. In doing so, we have created a world with a lot of stuff, a lot of technology, flight to take us wherever we need to go or would like to go. It's enabled to kind of, on a material level, instant gratification. But along the way, what we lost was collaboration, cooperation, respect for the unseen forces, which we're all now, all of us, everyone here right now, has come together because we do want to understand the nature of reality, the nature of consciousness, the nature of the unseen world that motivates and drives everything. Well, that was pretty much put to rest with the sixth wave of consciousness. But now, he said, this period of time has come that is called the ninth wave of consciousness. And remember, I was talking about how everybody's starring in their own movie. Some people are fearful, don't get near me, keeping the doors locked until some officials say you can come out. Others are saying, I'm over it, I'm done with it. I'll breathe on who I want to, and I'm out of here. I'm going to get back to life. And then you have the people in between. I'm one of the in-betweeners. Okay? So you have these two realities coming together at the same time. And the reality of the ninth wave is unity consciousness. So here we're all over the place. We've never been more disparate in our points of view, our politics, more polarized on every level. This isn't just the United States. This is global. I don't know that I've seen a time we've been more polarized. Now, you can say, yes, during the great global conflicts, World War I, World War II, the Napoleonic War, previous wars, yes, we're choosing a side and we're going for it. But I'm talking on a really deep interior level where we're each holding on to the things that we think are going to give our lives some kind of meaning and some kind of hope. I contend that human beings mostly want the same thing, yet we're all trying to find different ways to get there. So here we're spinning off all of these different realities simultaneously, and look how powerful thought is. We talked about this a while ago. This is creating pure chaos at the moment, but then here's this opportunity to join with. The ninth wave is available to all the previous waves and historical waves of consciousness. It is a matter of choice. So now if we're choosing right now, we can go into this ninth wave of consciousness that is unity-based. So look at what else is coming out of this. Yeah, people are segmented. They've never been more polarized in their beliefs and their thoughts and their, not desires so much, their politics. And at the same time, here you see this other event occurring in the streets at night, which has been happening certainly up until this moment, is people all over the world are marching together. People with dark skin and light skin are marching side by side. There is a crying out in their hearts. It's time we recognize each other as human beings. It's time we recognize each other's rights and dignity to live a decent life on this planet. The days of separation and polarization have to be over. And this is spinning all kinds of action out all over the world, right down to trying to defund police forces, firing officers. So much is going on toward the end of trying to find some kind of justice that brings people back together, or maybe together for the first time in unity. This is very much an expression of ninth wave unity consciousness, and it's beautiful. The other thing that came out of this is the most common thing I heard from people during COVID was how lovely it was to not have the pressure of getting on the hamster wheel that day. How nice it was to not go to work. How much of our work is doing something we don't particularly believe in or care about, but it simply pays the bills. Well, this is the conundrum of life on this planet. We can't, at this point, we're not all manifesting our dream jobs. So we're doing what we have to while we continue to do the things we love on the outside. But that means a large part of our time is occupied doing things that we don't love. Now, what's happened, some really interesting things have come out of that, even on a corporate level. On a personal level, it's like, do I really want to do this particular kind of work anymore? Is it fitting me on any level? Is it possible I could transition to something else? People coming back together with family via technology developed under the sixth wave of consciousness, under the masculine left side of the brain, so to speak, analytical consciousness, bringing people together in unity. Families who normally don't speak that often have joined in together from around the globe. My husband's family, I think there are 10 of them that have been Skyping with each other while they were under the stay-at-home kind of mandates. So again, you see these two levels of consciousness, the sixth wave, structured masculine, combined with the ninth wave of unity, which tends to be more feminine, and they're starting to dovetail at this odd time that's demanding something different of us. So I see this whole COVID thing, even though it's going to have repercussions, it is going to change our countries economically probably for a good long while, meaning it's going to have a knocked-on effect with us and our choices as consumers, where we're going to live. Do we need to sell our house? Do we want to? Do we want families to move in together? It will have all of that, but at the same time, it's bringing an unusual type of interdependence. What happens if it comes where, maybe you got a break for 3 months and didn't have to pay your mortgage. That's what your mortgage company said. And then they said, oh yeah, but all 4 payments are due on the 4th month. So you have to let go of your home. What happens then? Who do you love? Who loves you? Who do we turn to? What is a different reality we can create based on affiliation, love, partnership with people? This goes into that ninth wave unity consciousness. And these are different realities that we're going to have to choose between. Many of us are going to have to choose between. But I don't see this as a negative. I see this as a positive. Anything that shakes us from our moorings, that we can live in our own little digitized solo world with no dependence on other human beings, which has been the Holy Grail. That's what certainly women for thousands of years have been tried to create, is a need of a type of self-sufficiency, while at the same time retaining some of our nurturing and caring traits and raising our children. And that's been a mixed bag. It's had mixed results, but nonetheless, it was some forward motion. We had the security gained through being able to enter the workforce, so we didn't have to remain under the command of a partner that would tell us how we were to be, or we'd lose all of our security if they abandoned us for someone else. That's a big one. So that era of our consciousness is dissipating and has now given way to one where women, half the other population, are now feeling more empowered than we ever have before. So now bringing all of this together into this ninth wave of consciousness is a choice. That's the thing. As Carl said when we were speaking, it won't automatically happen. But if you're aware that it's a potential, this is a new, call it a parallel reality that we have a choice to enter into together. So then we look at, to me, it finally comes to this. Here we have these wonderful quirky Mandela effects. We have these experiences of, in my case, of instant healing. How can a physical state literally change in an instant? Well, it can, because time and space and matter isn't what we think it is. Will, intention, desire is very powerful. So we have these tools now that we know we're working with, that we know we have to work with. So we start coming down to, what can we hold on in a world in which there seems to be no agreed upon objective truth? This is a big one. Strapline on my site is truth matters. Well, truth does matter to me. At least what I perceive as truth, what I perceive as true may not be at all true to someone else. And I had to really rethink that. Yes, I'll leave it there, because truth does matter. I think we should try to find the highest truth in all of these effects in life. However, I started stripping it away and thought, is there anything that's less subjective, something more objective that we can choose to live into by way of finding our bearings as individuals and as society? And what occurred to me were the great virtues. I think all of us understand what kindness, patience, compassion, generosity, courage, love, we all innately feel in ourselves what these things mean. If it feels slightly different to one person than another, we can feel the power in those words. We can feel the power in allowing ourselves to go into the feelings associated with those words. So it occurred to me that whether we're looking at just for fun, looking at the Mandela effect, just to scratch our heads and say, wow, that's wild, that's crazy, or whether we want to look at the underlying principles of it, which is the nature of reality itself, we have to find our way forward. And I'm always about trying to use whatever I've learned in a way that has some meaning. And what I love about this is when you start pulling the threads of the Mandela effect and you start seeing the mind underneath it all, it has a lot of meaning. And so now how do we tap into that ninth wave of consciousness as one parallel reality that we can choose? Okay, we can choose that as our reality. We can do that. And there may be another parallel reality that goes into chaos and dysfunction, and maybe they're existing simultaneously on this planet. But where we go, where we choose to take our attention and our consciousness is what's going to matter to us. And that's when it really hit me that if we're living into the really classic basic virtues, is what I'm involving myself by way of thought, politics, just curiosity in general, where I'm putting my energy and time and attention in life, Is it taking me to a place that serves these higher kind of values in life? And that's the only lens I could think of to come from anymore. Does my thought process and what I'm choosing to associate with and to put my attention and belief into take me and take us to a more sustainable, higher place of unity, this ninth wave of consciousness? If it doesn't, I shouldn't be participating in it, because then I'm helping create that alternate reality. So that's how I'm viewing it. And to me, it's something worth playing with, is each time we can feel self-righteous. We all do. We all have fear of other and the unknown. That's to be human. But if we start believing in things and justifying them to support our own comfort rather than what is higher and what has more unity to it, we might start applying these lenses. When I think about this and I'm having this debate someone, is the position I'm taking going to take us to a place of more compassion, more generosity, more kindness, or is it going to take me further away from that? Every one of us has the ability to discern that for ourselves. And I would say that amidst all the craziness and chaos that we're seeing around us, amidst the vastly different belief systems that are being given birth to right now, if we each just took the time to ask those simple questions, I think we will have found our still point amidst it all, and a point at which we can really, truly grow from, not just get into old preferences and habits, but truly grow from. And as far as history itself goes, Stouffer's stovetop stuffing never existed. I could swear it existed. I could swear I saw that sign the way it was, all of these things. So I started thinking, what could we do about that? Well, if we're so inclined, I thought, what about if we each write our own book of life? What if we start writing down the things that are important to us now, that matter to us, that take us to that higher place, the articles and the books and the people that are inspiring and influencing us at this point in time? What if we write our own book of life? I already wrote my autobiography called Accidentally on Purpose, which, by the way, I've just finished recording onto audiobook, and in another month or so that's going to be out on Audible. So that took some time and some energy. And going back over it, again, it brought all these pixels of understanding and life back to life again for me, things that even as I wrote it, I've already forgotten about. And it's a lovely thing to be able to lay down and leave for your children and for your grandchildren, but also for ourselves. So when something disappears, like Stouffer's stovetop stuffing, we can go back and say, aha, it's right here. I'm telling you, it was real. So besides taking on, a gracious kind of viewpoint with an idea of coming toward a still point in the craziness, with an idea of moving into a unity type of consciousness, which we're on our way to. I see this as all upward movement, even though it's crazy. Seeing it's ugly, it's chaotic, but I see so much good coming out of this period because we're stopping to ask new questions. And if there's one thing the Mandela effect will do, it's to help inspire a lot of new questions. So in this incredible time in history, which I see as both painful, but positive, ultimately, I say, let's find our still point by looking at the true beauty in ourselves that we have to offer. What can we give to the world in terms of our own sense of unification and unity consciousness? Maybe it's a little patience. Maybe it's a little gift of understanding. We can contribute on 1,000 levels to becoming more unified as people, but it starts with that point inside ourselves in determining which path do we want to take, which one of these realities do we want to occupy, chaos or unity. It's a choice. And for all we know, I thought about it. I thought, God, what would a future scenario look like under the Mandela effect? And I was just, this just kind of crazy popped into my mind. I saw it's 30, 40 years down the road, and people are showing crowds at a sporting event, it doesn't matter, a football game, a basketball game, and everyone's wearing a mask. And you go back into archives, back into, 2010, before 2019, all the archives. And I thought, when we go back, would mask wearing become mandated and so ubiquitous that it overwrote the history of there was a time when we could dance cheek to cheek without a mask? There was a time when we could go to a sporting event without a mask. Would every picture that showed up historically after that all show people wearing masks from the beginning of sports history up through this time? Just a crazy thought I was having. How does this stuff rewrite itself, right? So anyway, that's just a little something I was playing with in my head. For all of you, I hope you find your way through this time in the most still and the most meaningful way possible. And I hope that you just have an amazingly wonderful and fun time just allowing yourself to ask every question possible as each of these amazing speakers comes up over the course of the next week. And I'll be with you in just a few moments here as we end this to do a little bit of Q&A. But meanwhile, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this. I want to thank you in advance for taking the time to watch all the other wonderful speakers with their really quirky, fun, and I think very important Mandela effects of their own. So until we have a time to do a little Q&A, thanks again for joining us here at the International Mandela Effect Conference 2020.
Hello, welcome to the question and answer session. We got some fabulous questions in this first segment. I love the keynote talk that Regina just gave. I think it calls us to take a look at a deeper sense of reality and look deeper within the Mandela effect, which is really what this conference is all about. So we got so many excellent questions. I'm just going to start off with the very first one that came through the chat, which is, this is from My Skies 5D. The question is CERN responsible for the Mandela effect?
Cynthia, I think you would be better off answering that one. I would be surprised if it is, because so many of the events seem to predate CERN. And I would imagine that this is something that humans have been experiencing throughout history. That doesn't mean that CERN can't be involved in manipulation of the effect and have involvement in the effect, but I don't know that it's responsible for the effect, because we're talking, at least this is just in my perception, Cynthia, you may have a totally different answer. We're talking about a phenomena that's always existed, which is the notion of multidimensionality, parallel timelines, and mind, the effect of mind in this matrix, this non-physical matrix. So I wouldn't give CERN that much credit. What do you think, Cindy? Cynthia?
Well said. Well, this is your moment to talk about it. I tend to feel that if you go back far enough with all of these possible explanations, you pretty much always hit consciousness, and you hit the same things physicists are looking at all the time as well. You're right, it goes to the nature of reality. Okay, the next question that I think is really worth taking a look at is, this is a little bit involved with the Mandela effect, so I can explain if you need help, but it's My Life DIY. Do you think we can manifest our old reality, timeline, etc. back? And is that what residue is? Now, I might need to explain residue to you, but that would be, do you know what residue is?
No.
No. Okay. Okay, residue would be like if you're looking at that movie film of the JFK assassination, you see art and scale models that all match what you remember, but then you look at the so-called actual footage and it's different. The residue would be the artist's recreations typically, or there might be, usually it's someone remembering something. So a clerk at a grocery store typing in HAAS avocado because they typed it in. So it's that kind of thing.
I think I understand. I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you. You're kind of garbled, a little bit garbled. So
I switched my microphone around.
There we go.
Yeah, there you go.
Way better. It's
Nice.
been really hard to hear you.
Well, maybe we can handle
one here.
Chris. Can you take
So
it?
you're saying the residual are the artifacts of an event, such as the remembrance?
I could explain that another way too.
Because you guys can probably answer better than me on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, because residue is something that's very challenging to people, something they can't understand. So an example would be the Ford logo. Many people remember the Ford logo being a certain way with the F.
Right.
and now it's always been completely different, but somebody found like an engine block from the 1940s or something that shows it the way they remember it. Kind of thing. Yeah.
So in other words, the previous version, the residue is what we call the previous version.
Yes.
The version in our collective memory.
Like Portrait of Dorian Gray. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So it's like, if you look at the Portrait of Dorian Gray, could we get that reality back once you start noticing, hey, I found a couple of examples of that.
Right. And I gave you my little flicker of an event, which was, strange. Okay. But it certainly made me ask that question, because I don't think science or any of us truly understand how this works, the nature of it. We have ideas of how it works. And so again, when you're coming to mind and creation and conscious, because to me, it all comes back to consciousness. It all comes back to mind. And I mean mind in the very greatest, highest, most creative sense, connected with all. The aspect of us that is connected with all, that can create at a really high level. The question is, how in connection are we with that aspect of self in terms of going, and you're saying altering the residue, so to speak? Is that what the question entailed?
Do you think we can manifest the old reality back? So it's kind of, can we go back to the way it used to be?
I would, you, and I want both of you to answer this. I would say not, because dynamics are dynamics in that moment, whether we're in a parallel timeline or whether we've overwritten a program through mind, through desire, will, enough intention going into a given thought that we've manifested what appears to be a parallel timeline. However those take place, the one thing about life is it never goes backward. But if you have enough will, to be able to pop, if it's truly just a parallel reality and you have the mastery to pop back and forth between one and another, then why wouldn't you be able to do that if it's a parallel timeline that doesn't require your additional creation?
Good answer. And my take on it, you want us to chime in? My 2 cents would be that on different levels of our reality. So me personally, I can see a flip-flop reality. I can watch it go back and forth, maybe a few times, and then I decide, okay, I want it this way. I guess I'm being asked to vote about it.
Well, that's good, because you're masterful at it too. You've spent a lifetime at it.
Yes, but then for the collective, when it's all of our collective consciousness, I think you're right. Once we've moved forward, it's a lot harder to get. It's like the Titanic turning it around. Right. So maybe it's doable, but it takes a lot more effort.
Yeah, because energy is always in motion, always creating by every nanosecond a different effect, no matter which timeline we're in.
But we have a quantum businessman here, and his specialty is timelines and timeline edits. So take it away, Chris.
Take it away.
Yeah, so like I can present it from like another point of view, more of like a computer view of the concept of, we'll call it bubbles of reality. So like, for example, I know someone that lives close to South America, and they had always known about pink dolphins their entire life. And for me, that was a Mandela effect. I thought it was like a mythical thing. There was no such thing as a pink dolphin. But because they were in that bubble of reality, or in that part of the world where they were, and I was in another part of the world, when the bubbles merged, so to speak, then I became aware of what they were always aware of. And I believe that a lot of that is what's happening. There are bubbles, we'll call them bubbles of reality, that are merging. And sometimes if you can think of it like in a computer type situation, I talk about things like timeline insertions and so forth. These things have to be merged in very carefully, and then there's not supposed to be any residue. It's supposed to be like a seamless merge, but that doesn't always happen. So I kind of look at it from another point, from the holographic universe, quantum computer simulation theory, that type of a thing. So that's my take on it.
Look, I have a quick question for you on that. How does that differ from simply being two realities that existed side by side, and one is simply aware of the reality in their part of the world, and one's aware of the reality in the other part of the world?
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And as these bubbles are merging, as the timelines are merging, we really can't go back. Now, I'm
No.
nostalgic. I like a lot. I like, you know, the Star Wars movie the way it used to be. I don't like that, and that's now. But yeah, we're advancing. We're rising in our consciousness.
Exactly.
So we can look back and be like, hey, that was fun, but we're onward and upward from here.
I agree. Well said. And Cynthia, I mean, I personally don't have the capability to just say, okay, I'm going to jump over to that one, which you do. So that's lovely. You can explain that part better than anyone.
Well, it's not, I mean, it's simple, but it's not necessarily easy. It requires complete, like, really being in alignment with your soul purpose, if you could call it. And so when what you want is also what your high self wants, what your angelic high self wants.
Exactly.
And what you absolutely love with all your heart and soul and fullness of being, and what you absolutely need, then no problem. It's very simple, right? Okay. But
I agree with that. I agree with that part. The hard part is listening to that voice.
And actually being aligned with it. I think
That's
often
what I mean.
the human experience is very different. I love the way you touched on that with sometimes you want what's easy, but is that really what you really are here for?
Right,
Perfect.
exactly.
Well, this is such a great segue because JoJo's asked another question. Do you believe you can create the reality you want to see or exist in?
I do. Since you and I were just talking about that just now, Cynthia, I do believe that. I mean, for every one of us, it comes a different way. And again, I think it comes back to this thing Cynthia was just talking about, which is, are we listening to the highest aspect of ourselves? Because that part is the one breathing and living through this physical body and with this physical body and with the conscious mind. So how do we discern when we're listening to the highest aspect of ourselves? Because with that, I find you almost can't do wrong. Once you're lined up with that voice and you're in alignment with you, with the true you. Well, for example, I wrote about this in my book, but I didn't talk about it. I was doing a documentary called Sierra in Peril. Now, I had never done a documentary in my life, but I'm confident. I told PBS I could do this. And so they let me do it because it was based on a Pulitzer Prize winning newspaper series. So they said, yeah, go for it. Well, environment wasn't chic. It wasn't in style at the time. You know, there wasn't appropriate athwear to wear in your environment of the day. It was just people caring about trees, they didn't think it was sexy enough. But they said, you know, it's a good idea. Let's take a look at this. Boom. They raised the money very quickly, which shocked everybody. And so once the money was raised, you know, the game's on. There was nothing that could go wrong. I wrote it, I produced it, I hired the musicians and told them what I wanted, sat for every edit. I was a total control freak. And the reason is because I had this picture in my head, this vision of trying to speak for the trees and for the water, especially the trees. And years before that, I had totally forgotten about it in this one session with these beings. They were talking to someone else and they said to me, and you do something about the trees. And I was looking like, are you talking to me? What am I going to do about the trees? Segue. Now it's years later, and I'm literally having music created that speaks for the trees. And it was very dramatic. There were some emotional moments, and it was of trees. And so then it went on to win all these awards and everything. And it was my first crack at a documentary. And it was simply because whatever that voice was, it said, and you do something about the trees, was in alignment with part of what I came to do in this lifetime. Legislation came in that started favoring protection of certain groves after that. One of the bodies of water on the other side of the Sierra Nevada gained extra protections in sessions after that. And so legislation actually changed when this came out and was made public. We even got funding from a logging company. And this is an environmental film, a logging company to take this and repurpose it for the public school system. And it was used at Berkeley all the way down to middle school. Nothing could go wrong. I couldn't have screwed it up if I wanted to, because it was in such alignment with my soul and what was needed. So that's an example of how you can't mess it up if it's in alignment. But if it feels like it kind of is and kind of isn't, and then I think you have to feel your way. And we all know in our heart when we're feeling our way to something, whether it's congruent with this thing that elevates and lifts us, where we know, even if it's a hassle, even if we're scared, we just know this is it. This is the right thing for me to do right now. We all know that feeling, and that is the big guidance system, I think, to higher mind. And when you're working with higher mind, you can do almost anything. So I do, yes, I absolutely agree. You can create it if you're in harmony with your higher self.
Such a great example. And those of us involved with the International Mandela Effect Conference agree with you, because we've just been coming together magnificently to pull this off.
Yeah.
So another question came in about, this is Wolfkey 74 Creations Lisa. Did your reality shift increasingly when you started noticing Mandela effects?
I want to answer that honestly. I think what the Mandela effect did, because I've tended to live in that place of fairly well congruent with my soul force, as far as I know. And that doesn't always look pretty. Things happen and then they don't work out and you say, oh God, did I screw up? But it's like, no, I think it hit the mark of fulfilling this larger thing. So I've always pretty much lived like that. So it didn't change my functional reality, but what it did do that was really useful is, and Cynthia, you and I talked about this in one of our shows, where someone is saying, no, I absolutely remember it happened this way. And you think, no, I absolutely remember it happened the way. What it does, for me, is it really expands my mind to the possibilities of all of our collective and individual experience and memory. So I'm not putting it down to an either or category. I find it very expansive conceptually. So that's how it really helped my life. And I thank you for that, Cynthia. That was really a big deal, just bringing up such a simple example in one of our interviews. It's like, right on. It's not about being right or wrong. So I loved it for that. How about you?
Well, it's similar to you. I've had lifelong experiences. I think that's what changes things. But then when you notice, wow, they've got a name for it. For me, it was like, finally, that they're coming on board. You must have felt that way too, 35 years into this.
Oh,
and it's
yeah.
that feeling of, wow, people care about the same things that I've been looking at. That reality is quite malleable, and
it is.
It's very responsive to how we're thinking and how we're feeling. So,
and we're not crazy. We're not crazy.
No. So I think that's thank you for all the work you've done, because you really laid the way for all the rest of us to come along and feel courage to speak up and talk about this. Well, and it really helps the whole community.
Thank you. That was another one of those crazy things. Like, this is financial suicide to start Conscious Media Network. That was back in 2004. And it was. But you know what? Here we are now. It laid the groundwork for a lot, including for us to be here doing this now. So yes, it seemed crazy. It's like, okay, let's just do it and see what happens. Well, a lot happened. A lot of stress happened. A lot of amazing, fabulous things happened. And it continued to build on to where Gaia used our interviews as a platform when they bought CMN to build what they have now. That was at the very base of it. And so many things happened that were good, even though it was crazy. It was a crazy idea.
Okay, now we're going to get into something that's a little bit strange, but nothing's too strange for you. So this is from Earth Daughter. She asks, do you think it's possible that dying is one way that we shift to another reality? This would be, what are your thoughts on quantum immortality theory? I don't know if you've heard about it before. Well, it's the idea that maybe we all died in 2012, that kind of thing. Or individually, when you die, then suddenly everything's
But you continue in another parallel timeline?
Yeah.
Like we just talked about, for me, that's certainly a possibility. And I think that would add almost, to me, so much complexity to the equation on a functional level that I don't know where I'd even go with it. Because we already know we're quantum consciousness. We already know that we're immortal consciousness. And so for me, whether I died that day in the Paris Underground, maybe we stepped on in another dimension. We stepped onto that train. Did I talk about that?
You did talk. Yes, you did. And I had a similar experience this year, not with the Underground, but I went to the doctor's office in January, way before we'd heard about COVID-19. And I clearly saw the sign. I thought I was sort of upset by it, because it said everyone who enters must wear a mask. And I thought, what nerve? And I thought, well, maybe they have a point, because I'm seeing people coughing and I'm thinking, okay, I'll take a mask. This is kind of pushy though. And then I sit down and I'm thinking maybe I should tell people because they're not putting their mask on. And I go to look at the sign like 20, 30 minutes later, and it doesn't even say that anymore. And then even when I see the doctor, he's asking, why are you wearing a mask? You're not sick. And I thought, this is so weird. I don't think I should bring this up right now.
Yeah, no, but you're so prescient that way, and you're so facile at being able to jump between these timelines. And
Right.
with me, I don't jump like you to be between timelines, but I feel everything. I feel things before they happen. So
Yes.
I have this sense of what's coming up. And certainly before COVID, I had a sense of a lot of things coming up, and my behavior was adapting accordingly as the other shoe was about to drop. And I won't go into the details of all the different ways I was perceiving it. Turned out those were the things exactly that we needed to do, right down to buying toilet paper accidentally, like 2 days before they mandated a shutdown in California. But all of these things were happening because I'm more kinesthetic in that way. Sometimes
Yes.
I can see, sometimes these events happen. As to whether or not I died that day in the subway and I only remember the one reality, I actually don't know. I don't have any sense that I, on another parallel reality, got onto that train and died. I only have the sense of this continued experience for this lifetime that goes on and jumps back and forth in time, at the finish of an incarnation. You have you two would probably have a much more experience in that kind of reality. So I would defer to you.
I did actually have an experience just a few years ago where people noticed that I had died. I got an email from someone I didn't know. I know we talked about this. You and I did, right? Yeah. And that was Steve Wisher. And he told me, you don't know me, and this may sound weird, but I remember that you died. But he's talking to the right person, because I just asked a lot of questions like, okay, tell me, when was this? How did you find out? What was the cause? I'm asking him these questions.
Right.
He gave all the right answers for the most recent time I really almost did die of pneumonia. Just a few years back, I had been extremely sick to the point that I told my husband, my parents, my daughters, just the close immediate family, nobody else. I said that was so bad that I almost died. And, but I didn't even tell anybody else. So that was very interesting. And some people told me, yeah, Moneybag 73 had been apparently done some sort of video about my life, which I, of course, never saw. And only a few people told me about that. They said they've seen it. So I got very interesting reports when I published it in my newsletter. And that was fascinating, just to be on the inside of that. But I'd already been experiencing the Mandela effect. So I don't know that it's necessary for me to die. I think of that as an extraordinary, exceptional human experience, like seeing UFOs, like lots of things.
Yes.
But Chris, let's get your input.
Okay, so for my input, what I'll leave it as a teaser for Tuesday for my presentation about timeline paradoxes, because I explained something that happened with the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, where the 7 astronauts died in the explosion. And then there was a whole situation where it appears that they are back alive again. Some people say they're doppelgangers. Some people just don't understand it. Was it a hoax by NASA? Like, the astronauts, were they actually even in the space shuttle when it went off? So when I give that presentation, I explain from my point of view what happened during that event, which caused a timeline paradox, which had to do with what we witness now as far as their lives, with people that look the same names, nearly the same birthdays, but they chose different completely different life courses. So that's my little teaser for Tuesday for people to tune in for that.
Oh, that's a fun one.
Yeah.
And I wonder about these things. I remember one missile that was launched from Vandenberg, I believe it was. I'm trying to remember whether it was Vandenberg or Edwards Air Force Base. It's been about 20 years now, and it made the news because it crashed, it crashed. And so the night before, I dreamt that it had crashed. And so when we're getting into this area too, and I'd like both of your comments on this, are we looking at events that have already occurred? They simply have already occurred. It just slipped on another time. It slipped in timeline, and they've actually already occurred. And it's just a delay in it coming into our time frame. Because that, with precognition, I've always wondered about what's happening with timelines there. Can you guys tell me what you think of that?
Well, there's a lot going on. It's hard to say for sure with certainty, like it's absolutely one thing or another. But it seems to me that time is not linear. Let's just start there. Like when we assume like it's going in only one direction at one speed, we know that's not true. It's very relative. And relativity is all about that to begin with. It's very easy to prove that there's no such thing as consistent time for everyone that's the same everywhere. So my own experiences are that I have also had lots of out-of-time experiences. I'll be going into detail, very specific cases in my presentation on Wednesday. But what I can say to answer all this, like what's my view on that precognition thing, and is that just a delay? Like, are you seeing the one timeline or is it parallel? I would say it's got to be some parallel version, perhaps. But sometimes, like what Chris is talking about, I think he's right. There may be bubbles of possibility, probability. Like there's something that's very likely. Yeah.
Yeah, oftentimes because the matrix of information and events and decisions that have led up to that moment have already been put into motion. So a likely collapse into an outcome has already occurred. So it could be you're just feeling the impression of the quantum field of information that has created the probability of the event. And maybe you're just seeing in a dream a physical representation of that. I mean, all of these are possible. I mean, that's why I love this subject so much. I don't have any answers. I only have my perception and more and more and more questions.
Right.
Yeah.
Chris.
If just getting back to what you mentioned about Vandenberg Air Force Base, there was an explosion that happened 3 months after the Challenger. I think it was April of 1986, where there was a rocket that was carrying a known spy satellite that blew up after it hit past the launch pad. So basically,
that may have been the one I'm referring to because it was just back a while. Yeah.
So what you're referring to too is a gift, like a psychic gift, where you can see the probability of timelines, and as you get closer to an event, the probability of that timeline increases even more to the point where you can become precognitive of it, especially if there was another factor that was involved in blowing up that rocket. Did that rocket blow up by itself? Was it a true accident? Were there extraterrestrials that were involved that didn't want that spy satellite to go? There's all kinds of reasons for it.
Well, yes, absolutely.
But you're tapping into something, absolutely, for sure.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And that happens quite a bit. And so I do wonder, is this a parallel reality effect, or is this simply seeing the culmination of all the information resulting in a collapse into a particular outcome? And it could be any and all of the above. And by the way, I think you might be aware of it, but I believe it was in the late 60s, early 70s when they shot that one missile off to the moon, loaded with a warhead. There's still existing film of the ETs coming in from all directions and disabling it. And I think it was running at about 14,000 miles an hour and managed to get boom, 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 very strategically and took that thing down. So there is a history of that.
What I love on that topic is I love what Stephen Greer says. So he points out that when you look at who is the danger to themselves and others, tends to look like the body of evidence shows that the humans are. So we're the ones that have some work to do.
Absolutely. That's not going to, putting that garbage out into space and ruining other environments is not going to be taken well by others that have maybe a little more wisdom.
Yeah, and I could go one step further too with that rocket carrying the spy satellite. When it blew up, there were, in 2019, there were CIA declassified documents that came out that showed that there was high suspicion within the CIA that Russia was involved, and that Russia could have been involved in the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster as well.
Interesting.
That could have led to World War III or more distrust between nations.
Right.
Things like our going to the International Space Station and having that cooperation could have ended. So there are all kinds of things at play when it comes to these things, all kinds of levels.
Fascinating. And talk about parallel realities. I won't get into any details, but just stopping to think of how this country, the US, felt during the Cold War days and the incredible fear we had over these people we thought were just monsters in the East, the Soviet Union, East Germany, the Soviet bloc. and not stopping for 1 minute to embrace another reality, they felt exactly the same about the evil West, right? These bubbles of perception.
Exactly.
Oh, there's a great presentation last year's conference by Shane Robinson of Unbiased and on the Fence, and he really gets into that whole idea of being unbiased, and seems to be the extremists that cause the trouble. So I love that point.
Exactly.
But let's go a little more positive.
Yeah.
Not that we weren't, but here's a question from the Rippin' Rabbit Hole, AJ, and he asks, is it possible to instantly heal the world?
The whole world at one time? Personally, this is just my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I don't think so for one reason. Because who's making that decision? Who has the discernment to know who needs what kind of healing where? You know what I mean? This is a collective of souls of every kind who have come here to experience life. Do I think that there's like a savior that will come and simply flash a new pulse of energy in, and everyone simply readjusts, and it's like, oh my God, you know, I'm so sorry I haven't been kind to you. I don't think it works like that on this planet. I think it works on a level where we have to actually engage with life, feel these impulses, and then make new decisions based on them. Do I think that we can collectively heal the world? Heck yes, I absolutely do. Do I think something from the outside can come and do it for us? I don't think so. I think it's going to take our maturity, our care, our awareness, and our intention to start bringing about these healing changes. And I'm seeing them happening. I mean, this is an amazing period of time. I mentioned this before, Carl Kalleman, right? This whole notion of the ninth wave of consciousness, where all these waves of consciousness, vis-a-vis the Mayan tradition, are intersecting at this time. And anyone who chooses to move up into the ninth wave is unity. And I think that's where the healing happens. And that's what I love about the protests on the street that are happening right now. This is different and everyone can feel it. Now we're playing for real. You know, our attempts at writing the scales in the past were original attempts, and they were all good. They were all well-intentioned, but they didn't have the critical mass of complete heartfelt understanding. It's time for people to all be treated with dignity and respect. And now we're feeling it and we're getting it. There are people who are not feeling and getting it, okay? And that's what I'm saying. And that's a choice too. That's a different process of learning. Everybody's going to learn in their own time. So I think it's this incredible process of transformation, both individually and intention together as groups. We're all catching that same wave of consciousness. So yeah, if we choose to move into unity consciousness, we can do a tremendous amount to heal the planet and to heal ourselves and make a livable place for all the other species, all of our other friends as well. So that's my opinion.
Love it. That's great. I love it very much. And I like the way you describe it both ways. Starting off kind of on the dark side, like, nope, not going to happen. And I'm going to.
Not
well,
from
we all
the
pull
outside.
together. Yeah.
This is our place.
Outside.
We have to fix it.
Yes. And I think that's the key, is responsibility and getting off. Just to add my 2 cents here, is often we get into some drama. People feel like they're victimized, and then hurt people become hurt people. And we've got the drama triangle that just rotates around, with victims becoming persecutors and moving on to being rescuers. And so the key is get off of that. Stop blaming someone. Look to yourself. Look to what you call unity, that ninth wave that you're talking about. Just really recognizing, like, how I love how good can it get, because it just takes you right there.
I love it.
Get into that state of reverence, and then you're on track. And then anything that's not that vibration, you can easily vote against it. I've had moments where I have felt myself voting with some kind of collective, like I'm getting my opinion asked, like, is the world about to blow up? And I said, no, no. So there are some of us that are kind of on that fail-safe network, if you want to call it that. And I think there are a lot of people that are doing that kind of thing.
I think so. And I feel very optimistic about us. I think we're on an upward trajectory, regardless of what it looks like on the outside. I don't think, at least in the past, 10, 12,000 years, if not far longer, I don't think we've ever been more, for example, compassionate and kind than we are right now. I mean, we in the past did atrocious things to one another, and it was considered entertainment. We don't do that anymore. I have faith that we as a collective are moving in the right direction. And it's not just because of political correctness, it's because we're refining ourselves and we simply know better. And all we have to do is just keep doing that together. We're just going to keep bringing it up.
And like you said earlier, it's not always pretty, but we'll get there.
We'll get there.
Yeah, COVID-19 is not pretty. This is a big mess right now. That's okay.
It's offered some real gifts. In my opinion, it's offered some real gifts.
Oh, absolutely. Viruses are the reason we have memory to begin with. So we're probably getting an upgrade right now.
I agree with you. I agree totally. So yes, we're on the same page.
Next question from the medium that rocks. If you could tell those feeling that they are being called to serve, how and what would you say? I don't think I wrote that down quite right, but you know what I mean. So these are the people that are being called to serve.
Yeah.
And they feel like they should be serving. What would you say to those people?
Again, it would always go back to the same thing of discernment. On what way are you being called to serve? Sometimes we're being called to serve and we don't recognize it, or we're recognizing it as something else, when in fact, you'll know. If you feel you're being called to serve in a very specific way and you bounce in and you give it your all and you get resistance, that means you're being called to serve, but maybe you haven't yet hit on the exact means of service or way in which it's to be done. It doesn't mean that you're a failure and you're not here to serve, because if that's bubbling in your heart, you are here to serve. And sometimes it's in a shockingly grandiose way. I mean, some people just like suddenly they have a meteoric rise with their means of service, and other people, it's soft and it's subtle and it maybe affects just a few people around them, but a few of those key people around them are going to affect so many others that it's actually a huge service, but we're not even recognizing the beauty. Sometimes we don't recognize the beauty in the modest means of service. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. It doesn't have to be media. It doesn't have to be big and splashy. You don't have to write a book. None of that has to happen in order to be of true service. Oftentimes people who write books aren't of service. Sometimes it's more filling an egoic need in the person. So I wouldn't put anything that's has high profile on a pedestal at all. I would look to the people who are literally day in and day out operating from that place in their heart. And it may seem inconvenient. Maybe they don't make a lot of money at it sometimes, but they can't stop because it's theirs to do. So if you're willing to accept the gamut there and see where you plug in, if you get resistance, just, check the weather vane, move it a little bit and say, I feel it. Something's not right, until you hit on it, and then show up 100% no matter, it doesn't matter. Even if it looks like it's something insane. I've done that before. You show up anyway. Nothing should stop you once you've hit that place where you know what you have is needed and you're loving giving it.
I love how your book shares those examples. I'm so glad you're bringing it out as an audiobook too, because I know that's going to inspire people.
I finished recording. It's a process. Now it's in post-production. So next month or so, it should be all together, I hope. So
excellent.
Yeah. So that's my take. What about yours, Chris? Also,
yeah. Let's hear from Chris.
I would say I agree with everything that you guys said. Follow the synchronicities as well.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes they'll be presented to us and we might be like, oh, that was just a coincidence. And it happens again. Oh, that's another coincidence. But my feeling is like, there's nothing coincidental actually at all. Like everything is synchronistic. And sometimes it is uncomfortable. Sometimes sometimes you have to put yourself out there. Sometimes just you being you and just raising your own frequency just radiates to others naturally. So however it is for everyone, you just follow the synchronicities that your higher consciousness will show to you.
Perfect.
Yeah. And I do that too. When I got started doing spiritual life coaching, I was so embarrassed. I just felt like this is so different. Like I'd studied physics. I got an MBA degree. I worked in information technology at a data center doing project management, doing strategic planning for Citibank, basically, So I was on a totally different wavelength. And then I went through a Kundalini awakening and started getting feel this very clear sense. I am here to heal. I'm here to write. I'm here to serve. And I thought I was so clever. I just said, someday, I'll get to that someday. And then, but I do like you suggest, and I listen to things. And, you know, I ask for 3 signs. If I get 3 signs and they're all pointing the same direction, that's very clear. I can't miss, well, shouldn't say I can't. Hopefully I won't miss that. So what happened is I got 3 phone calls to my unlisted phone number from 3 women who they all had the same question. Can you talk to my angels? And I said, yes. And then I found out, how did you find my number? And they said, each of them said, my angels gave me the number. And the third one, I was so flabbergasted. By the third time, I started getting myself together. By the time the third one called, I said, how did you see my website? Because it didn't have my phone number. And she said, you have a website too? And I was like, no way. It's crazy. So you're right. I mean, both of you are correct. And I think that's the nature of it. I'd gone through a Kundalini awakening. I promised my spirit I'm on track. And then I tried to pull that fast one, like I'll get to it eventually. So don't think you can get away with anything when you're working with your high self. It doesn't work
Absolutely.
that way.
When the time arrives, that's it. I just
Right.
flashed back. I thought, where did I cross over into doing spiritual work? And because you said I was embarrassed, right?
Yes.
And I had one of those embarrassing things happen too. I was a news anchor and a young mom. And so I was in a community where you had to have high credibility. Not that there's anything credible about the news, by the way, but that's the perception, right? And someone had found out that I'd been doing automatic writing. And so in this case, the Sacramento Bee called up and said, can we do a feature on you? And I thought, okay. I thought, if there's a time, I mean, don't be a hypocrite. You know, if you believe in all of this, you know, and this was a long time ago, then stand up and own it. And so I thought they'll do a little article, it'll be buried. And meanwhile, at that time, I was introducing Rush Limbaugh. He was just starting out. So I was introducing him and in the news and all this. So this is kind of the environment and milieu of the day, right? And so it turned out it was a 2-page feature in the Sunday section. And I was so embarrassed. I mean, I thought I should have never done this. After I got cold feet afterward, but the cat was out of the bag and then things just started changing. I lost my anchor job, not because of that, but you know, they decided women couldn't solo anchor. We weren't smart enough.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, because I think that's the key. And Chris, do you want to talk about that embarrassing moment? I don't know if you want to share that or not, but I'm proud of you, Chris, just for stepping out and saying the Mandela effect is real.
Yeah, I was going to say which embarrassing moment, because there have been many, but yeah, basically, like even for me, like with my software company and so forth, noticing the changes, stepping out, creating a video, kind of like uncomfortable, but I felt so passionate about what I had to say. I just wanted to share it. And I'm just so happy it's led me in these wonderful directions.
It's interesting how things move once you have that embarrassing moment.
Yeah.
Yes.
I personally never use news in the old way again. I never went back on as a newscaster. I decided from that moment, once that changed, if I do media, it will only be for things that I believe aren't getting fair voice right now, to help others have a platform as well who aren't being heard at this time. And so that was it. That was the defining moment.
Well, I'm so glad you're doing what you're doing, because that's the gateway to the true news for so many of us.
Yeah,
it's just because you are that voice of discernment and clarity that we look for. You know, and to me, that's what the news is really about. It's the real news, what really matters.
It should be, right.
So thank you for all that you do. I've got another question also from the medium that rocks. What does our social discord now mean for the nature of reality itself? And how best do we create consciously?
That's interesting. And I think everyone needs to chime in on it. I keep thinking about that and what's happening and I'm having these strange, I was at the airport. I just got in from Gaia, did a lot of interviews this week. And I was at the airport and I keep having this same surreal feeling that kind of punctures into the future. And I thought, and I actually thought of an anecdote to it. I thought, we don't realize how much of our life is collective and is embedded in reading the expression of others. Whether you're passing someone in a grocery store, all of these things now, we're hooded and masked. You can't see any expression. You can't tell if someone's frowning or smiling. You feel disconnected from one another in this surreal kind of like iRobot kind of film, you know? And
Yeah.
I've looked at that, and I think I even mentioned that I looked at that, and I keep seeing this social conditioning thing happening that's going to be punching into our future. And I think it's up to us, whatever controls that reality. And I'm not going to speculate. Whatever controls that reality, I think we need to double down on our decision to connect with one another in a meaningful and deep way. And if that means we go back to the days of speakeasies, whatever we have to do to gather together as human beings and feel one another and talk with one another and keep our social structure going on whatever level we can, I think it's really critical, because this has a really what's happening now is having an incredibly, to me, my perception of it and watching people around, I watch a lot, is having an incredibly deadening effect on connection. And I thought about it. This is crazy, okay? I thought what we need to do is someone needs to start manufacturing masks with facial expressions. So you can either have a frown, you can be laughing, you can have it. One lady made one with a cigarette hanging out of flabby lips. You know, it's just have mouths and faces, but expression here. So when we see one another, we have some semblance of connection with one another. Oh, in spite of this thing going on right now, because I just have this feeling, and maybe you can tell me what you think, Cynthia, and also Chris, if you've seen into this as well, please. For the future, I see this mask scenario, if not entirely going away, popping up.
Popping up, huh? That's interesting. Well, I know we've been through this before with the Spanish flu, so I find that a good jump point, because we don't really know what ended that pandemic. It just sort of cleared up, and it became what we now know as the seasonal flu. But during that time of wearing masks between 1918, 1920, a year and a half or so there, everybody was having to go through that same thing, or quite a few people were. And those that didn't, I guess not everybody did, but quite a few people did. So they've been through that before. But, you know, there was like a repressive instruction for the populace not to say anything bad about the government at that time. And I think that's interesting. Yeah, very interesting.
And the same thing's happening now, but the difference is they did not have media which programs perception like we do.
Right.
That changes everything. Globally, we have media forming our perception of reality. If we're connected with media, I don't care what kind of device and which channel you're looking at, we still have media forming it. And this organic nature, and I'm not saying this is forever, but I'm almost, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but what I'm seeing is a kind of parallel reality in which this mask thing continues. And I don't know if it'll become, I said this in my talk, I don't know if this will become part of a Mandela effect one day. I have no idea. It's possible. I'm just saying, I think we need to choose ourselves, one another. We need to let our heart shine. We need to smile at one another. We need to just see each other's faces to elevate our social structure from this point forward, because I think it's going to become more difficult if you're plugged into the world around you.
I agree with that. And I love what you said about the airplanes and you've had so much experience traveling, which a lot of people are not doing right now, going through airports. And I've seen that one stewardess was holding some kind of a sign with a smile that she just hold up, because we feel sort of weird when you're boarding an airplane and you don't know if the person is staring at you, glaring at you, or smiling. You can't tell.
You don't. Well, my mask that I wear, because it's more breathable inside it, is a kind of little bit of, I have to say, a bit of a grotesque looking woman. And she has a nose and a nose ring, you know, pierced nose, and kind of, again, sort of these flabby lips. It's the same one that made the one with the cigarette hanging out. She's a woman who's an artist who lost her job during this. And so she started making these facial expression masks. And I had one on, and I noticed, I thought, God, I wish someone else, because people would look at me and they kind of laugh because it's funny looking. And I thought, God, I wish other people had these. I wish I could laugh with them. And, you know, or see someone who wants, like one kid had a shark, you know, a shark mouth, like, a little teenage boy, which was a perfect expression of a teenage boy. So I would like to see, even in the midst of this, our finding our way back to some kind of connection and expression. So
the connection is the key.
Yeah.
And the question that came in was about social discord and the connection with the nature of reality. So to me,
yes.
Yeah. Do you want to go back to that again? Just
yes.
briefly?
Okay. Sorry about that. I see the social discord as an incredible movement upward. I don't see it as a downward movement. If there were a time to stake your claim and tell your truth, this is the time to do it. The energy is begging us to tell our truth. And if it's creating social discord, when has change ever happened in a lovely, elegant, seamless way? It doesn't happen. It never happens. That's not how humanity has ever functioned, and we still don't. So the discord we're seeing, I see as people stepping up with courage, saying, no, this is what I believe and this is how I feel. And yeah, I think it's creating almost like, in that sense, it's creating a disruption in the social fabric. But I think in terms of individual development toward the collective in the end, it's a good thing. Does that make sense? Yes. We're now saying, you're so nuts, I can't talk to you anymore. I just can't go with you on that one anymore. Now, that's tearing people apart who normally would have been together. It has families at each other's throats. The divorce rates are skyrocketing. Apparently, the dockets to get a divorce, if you want to get a divorce after being cooped up with someone, you have to wait a while because the court system's jammed. So all of these things are happening, but look what happened when we were forced to just sit and look at each other and look at ourselves for those months.
So the nature of reality connection.
I think that's a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And when I look at the nature of reality, I think of those bubbles and the, these timeline changes that Chris talks about. And the fact that we do have these little bubbles of reality. There are possible realities. You can sense them out there. You're touching on that with the masks. And with the social discord, I think we can feel that too. We can feel like, here's a reality where people are totally disrespectful. Here's one where they're coming up that empathy curve. Yeah. And I know that that's part of this collective consciousness. We talk about oneness, but there's a lot of steps before oneness, frankly. And so, the oneness is kind of cool. It gives you something to latch on to. Like, how good can it get? You're at that optimal viewpoint, God level, whatever you want to call it. But then there are interim areas of consciousness. And I think we're sort of finding our way. And it is messy. It's like a birth. That would be what I'd say.
I totally agree with you. And, to me, it seems like if we were all holding our tongues out of political correctness, there's a time where that has to stop and you have to rip the mask off and show who you truly are. And that's what this social discourse is about. We've ripped our masks off. Now we can see ourselves for what we are. We can see our cultures, our cities, towns, our friends, our families. We all get to see everything for what it is. That had to happen. That's the bumpy, ugly part. But I think the healing will come from that.
It just occurs to me that my book Reality Shifts talks about taking your mask off. It's like a huge section of it. It's so funny and so ironic that we're in it right now. But Chris, chime in, please.
Yeah. So what I was going to say about the mask, lots of different viewpoints, but for me, it's very symbolic. It's symbolic that you don't have a voice. You're muzzled. You're submissive to the government. You're an obedient citizen of George Orwell's 1984. I mean, every time I see people around with their masks, even people that are by themselves, they're riding their bikes or they're jogging with a face mask. Come on. There's no one even around you for 20 feet, but they still have to wear their mask. So that symbolism of obedient, submissive citizens that do not ask questions, but simply obey, I think is a symbolism that people are going to get eventually, and they're going to want to rip their masks off because, we have a voice. We want to use it. And then talking about everything else that's going on, the social discord and so forth, from the looking at it from an astronomy point of view, our solar system is transitioning out of something called the local fluff. And I never heard of this before. It's like an interstellar cloud. It's like a nebula where there's more helium and hydrogen. We've been in a big dust cloud, so to speak, that has been making everything around us more dense. So as that's dissipating, it's almost like a wave of purity that's like washing over the planet, washing over all the planets in the solar system. Things are going to be exposed. They can't help but be exposed. Structures that shouldn't be there, whether they're social or whatever, they're just going to go away and they're never going to come back. There are businesses that are never going to come back, and they shouldn't ever come back. So these types of things are like looking at things a different way. And also too, as our frequency rises, I believe like the quarantine took us all by surprise, right? There's going to be some other stuff that takes us by surprise. And I talk about this too in some of my presentations, between our world and the spirit world and us seeing things that we couldn't observe before. But I think fasten your seatbelts, because we've got 2020 is not over yet. We're halfway there, but there's a lot more to go. For sure.
Absolutely. I agree with you. And having doing an interview with Simon Chikoisky and also with Robert Phoenix, both of Western and Vedic astrology, are saying the exact same thing. The stars are lined up for this to happen right now. That in the Vedic astrological view, we have a period we've entered that he refers to as the energy of revolution and the outsider. And it started in 2015 and it ends in 2033. But he said the most chaotic node in this is the year 2020. And the most chaotic moment in 2020 is the month of December. And so we can only start imagining now all of the possibilities for December, right? The point I love about what you said is, yes, there is this kind of, you will comply with these masks on one hand, and then you have people right today, right now, ripping them off at the Tulsa rally. Screw that. I'm not wearing a mask anymore. I believe in this guy. This is what I'm doing. That's a reality. And like I said, I do see this something, and I can't get my mind around it yet. This, whatever this mask symbolizes, as a potential timeline or parallel reality, but I don't see it as mine and I don't see it as ours, but I see it as someone's. Someone's. It's going to exist for people who need it to exist. There will be something in the reality that creates, whether it is symbolic or real, that reality of having more censorship, when in fact right now we're in a time that is calling to do away with all the structures, like you said, Chris, perfectly, that no longer serve us. It's done. And you think about these businesses, some of these really large ones and struggling mom and pop businesses. I mean, I noticed in our community, our masks came off early. We've had no increase in COVID, not a single new death in a month since the mask came off, and almost no cases to begin with. And it's a county of 400,000 people. So it's medium size, right? And people are basically, the farmer's market was crowded this morning. Now we're ordered to put our masks back on. That's okay. Either way, it wasn't, we weren't having an increase in COVID without the mask. So whatever the consciousness is here, and forget the science of it right now, the consciousness is such, we were not affected when we came, because Placer was one of the early counties to say, okay, we can kind of get back to business now. And so it's interesting because it was a mindset here. And so that mindset will go on and live in the sunshine above ground, be healthy, like all of us here. But there may be another reality taking place that isn't finished with that thing that is represented by the mask. And I can feel it because I'm a feeler, but I don't know what it is and how it's going to express, but it'll make itself clear to us. We'll see where that's going to be kind of run by us once again.
Well, thank you so much. That's a great answer. And any last questions you want to ask, Chris? Because I didn't catch beyond what the last question I did ask. Anything else come up in the chat feed that you want to bring up?
No, but one of the things I want to just like say a little bit, because I've been thinking about this too, that Regina brought up, was that, you know, as our frequency rises, because the planet's frequency is rising, people look at the Schumann resonance, for example, and they can see the planet's vibrating faster, which means we're vibrating faster. Whether we like it or not, our higher consciousness is like hit that reset button. So these things are starting to happen. But if there are controllers, if there is a global narrative, if there is such a thing as domination and control, which somehow lives off of our consciousness energy, as our frequency rises, they have less and less to feed off of, which means they have to put in more and more controls to get the same results as they did before. So there's just so many things seem uncertain and crazy, and who knows what the future holds. But overall, it's like we're on the right track. Absolutely. It's going to be painful. It's going to be fun. It's going to be joyful. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be everything. But we're definitely on the right track. That's the way I feel about things.
Yeah, go ahead, Regina.
I was just going to say, I agree. And the main,
Okay.
our own enemy is fear. That's it. That's the enemy, fear. As long as we're not in fear, we are a wily, wonderful, creative species. So anything that gets thrown at us, we can find a workaround and to come up above it. I really, truly believe that. That is the beauty and conundrum of being human. And that's why any other being, species, people who want to tamp that down a bit are not ultimately going to succeed. We're very creative species. Plus, we've got a heart pumping that has compassion.
I think there's a message too in the whole Juneteenth celebration that some people are saying they've never heard of, because it celebrates this time that the slaves in Texas finally found out 16 years later that they've been free for 16 years and didn't know it. And that touches on what you were saying, Chris, that, basically we're free. And a lot of us haven't realized it for a while. And maybe that's also, there's a parallel with the 2012 year. And then now some people are saying, no, this is the end of the Mayan calendar. Some 8.5 years later, who knows? But the point is, the same message is true. We're free. And I love what you said, Regina, that we're the ones we've been waiting for. So.
Yep, we are the ones we've been waiting for. We will save ourselves. Thank you. Don't need intervention and help from anyone outside there. Except, of course, our loving forces and guides and the great creative forces. But I'm talking about, like you were saying, Chris, ultimate control over the human species will not work. It's not going to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Guys, I hate to interrupt here, but I have one question from the chat.
Okay.
This is a super chat. Thank you, Victoria Macros. Says, I apologize if the question has come up already, but I'd really like to know your thoughts about mandatory vaccines, how to protect ourselves and loved ones, and ultimately keep our autonomy through all of this.
Good question, and Regina is very knowledgeable.
Well, I certainly have my opinions. I think that's actually a large part of what this is about. At the very beginning, when this first started, there were no shutdowns. I just heard inkling little bits of it. Actually, in February, I was in a little hotel in San Francisco, and I saw 2 men from China with masks on. And I had really only just heard that China was having some issue over there. But this feeling came over my body, and I remember just this sinking feeling, thinking, hadn't come here yet it hadn't come here yet that we were aware of. Of course, we know now it's been here for quite a while. But so anyway, somewhat after that, I let that go and thought, well, that was kind of a creepy feeling. And then sometime after they announced it had first started making it to the United States, and our area was one of the first areas because of that princess liner that came in. That we were aware of. Let's just say that we were aware of. And I thought, what is going on here? So I went inside. I do talk to my guiding forces about large things. I don't ask them about small things, but I do ask about large things. And so it's just once in a while. And I said, if there's something to see, tell me what this is. And the words were exactly, this was created to benefit the few over the many. And so I thought, alrighty then. And I just listened. And they said, what this will do is precipitate great amounts of fear on the planet. And once that fear is in place, there will be a demand for the products that they're going to create, which are vaccinations. So right off, they were telling me the whole thing, right? They said the vaccinations are the goal. It's not this. This will pass through, but it's the vaccinations. And once they start perpetuating these vaccinations and people line up begging for them, then the health problems really begin. So let people know, do not engage with these vaccinations that they're going to do. They will cause many more problems. And if I've done a lot of research on the nature of this and so forth, and we've pretty much, and Zeus, my husband, has as well, we've pretty much come to the opinion or the understanding. And if you look at it, there's tons on this stuff. You can go to citizenzeus.com. He has 46 links on this, the creation of this virus alone. We're looking at something, COVID's been around for thousands of years, but a little something's been inserted into it. That insertion will corrupt any kind of attempt at a vaccine. the vaccination is supposed to mimic what this virus is. Well, it has an insertion in it. So the question you asked about is mandatory. I personally, I don't see it as being mandatory per se, because we have too much discord, way too much to distract us at this moment. And there's going to be more discord as we start coming toward the elections in the United States. And this is a global issue. It's not just confined to the United States, but the people that make these vaccines, they're global. They're global. This is going to be foisted on populations around the world. We already know, and Cynthia can speak to this, you cannot make a safe, effective vaccine. First of all, seasonal flu vaccines are arguably not that effective, as they make people vulnerable to the subsequent flu that's coming along. So look at that alone. Then we have something, has a little something inserted in it here. Not cool. Okay, and you cannot make those in a short amount of time. But people are so frightened because of the media, they're going to be begging for them. And what I was shown is that's when people's health starts deteriorating. And then the same individuals make money on gaining the patents that will take care of all the side effects that people will be experiencing after receiving these vaccines en masse. Because right now, adults don't receive them necessarily en masse. It's voluntary, and most people I know don't get seasonal flu vaccines, only my father. So I think we might avoid the mandatory thing. However, it can be incentivized in very sneaky ways. Like if you're going to travel abroad, you have to have a vaccine. And then it's going to come down to some choices. If that happens, we have to be prepared to know how far we're willing to take our stand to not have this stuff inserted into our bodies. That said, I think there are a lot of things we can do if that happened for some reason to supercharge our immune systems and raise our frequencies so that we're not as subjected to whatever the ill effects of a vaccine could be. So really, I can't talk about it too much because we'd be talking for hours. It's multidimensional. Can you raise your frequencies above the frequency of the trash they want to insert into you? That's going to be a question there. Do you want to modify your lifestyle and say, you know what? I don't need to travel abroad right now. I'm not getting that stuff. I'll make a great life right here. That might be a level you have to look at. But the main thing is, I don't think they're going to be lining people up, even though that was stated. I don't think that's going to be happening, at least not in the United States. We have way too many other problems right now. That would cause so much unrest. I think it would just tear the house down. That's my opinion, though. That's my opinion. So I would like your opinions too, because it's something that's on people's minds.
Yeah, Chris, you want to go first? You have a lot to say too.
Oh, I have crazy stuff to say because it involves Stouffer's stovetop stuffing and our mitochondria. So one of the things, there's like these connections that have been coming to me, but one of the most important parts of our biology is our mitochondria. Like all of our cells have mitochondria inside of them, mostly in our brain, in our heart, in our liver. They provide the electricity for our body. So if we didn't have mitochondria, we wouldn't be able to emit what are called biophotons, which allows us to be seen and to be alive, so to speak. And there actually is a connection to that with, I'll probably explain this in more detail. I really want to make a video about, because I always talk about the Stouffer's stovetop stuffing and how it's a timeline brand takeover.
Yeah.
And there are other hidden things behind it. But ultimately, there are forces out there that don't want our frequency to rise. And the way our frequency rises is actually with our mitochondria. They're so valuable. They have their own consciousness. They know when we talk to them and we give them appreciation. They say, there's a Professor Nick Lane from England. He wrote this book called, I forget what it is, but it's about the life of the mitochondria. And gram for gram, the mitochondria in our body generate more electricity and power than the sun. So you take a gram of the sun's energy and a gram of the mitochondria in our body, and we are emitting more of that. So the vaccine, I feel there's all elements to it with 5G and this and that, but I think ultimately it's to like dumb us down a bit, make us not as bright, so we can't take advantage of all this new energy that's washing over the planet. So yeah, I kind of go into that direction, but everyone's opinion is like so valuable for us to figure out what all these things mean. But ultimately, the controllers, right now they think they're in control, but they're not. Like I actually feel everything they're going to do is just somehow just going to fall apart. It's not going to work out. And the more they try to tighten their grip, the more it's just going to get even worse for them. So I feel that there will be talk about vaccines and mandatory vaccines, but I personally think it'll fall apart.
Yeah, I think it will too. What about you, Cynthia? And thank you for that. I agree. To keep humanity tired, exhausted, not shiny, that makes us very dependent upon outside material solutions. And that's what we don't want to get involved in. Absolutely.
Right. Well, my take on it is also in agreement with both of you. I don't see that the mandatory vaccinations are a necessity, or that they're definitely coming. So I think there's too much resistance to that, and that's a good thing, because I think that it's raising some topics now that are foreshadowing future topics about artificial intelligence being implanted in our bodies. So it's basically a harbinger of things to come. So we're looking at something and not even realizing the extent of it, but we see it. We see it with the masks and the automata robot feeling. And we almost wonder, like, what reality are we in? Where are we going? And I like that feeling that people are starting to notice, I don't like this, and this is not acceptable. And okay, we'll wear the mask for a while, but I crave that contact, the connection, and there's no way that we want to be forced into putting things in our body that may have definitely violated the precautionary principle. I really am a strong believer in the precautionary principle.
Yes.
And if anytime you rush technology to market without adequately looking at what are you doing, big mistakes tend to be made. And we've seen it again and again. So I'd recommend, let's follow the precautionary principle. That
Absolutely.
means, yeah, so if people want to get the vaccine, great, but it should not be foisted on everyone. And I would agree with both of you. I don't see that happening.
Yeah. Nope. I'm so glad that we actually are in agreement on this one, because there's no point in people being, I get emails from people all the time that are so frightened because they've been watching various conspiracy sites and they think they're going to be run down the chute. The nanotechnology is going to be shot in them along with the vaccine against their will. And I think sometimes we give these things too much credit. I think a lot of times we give it too much credit.
Right. I was at a, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to finish with one thought, and that is, we think this is a concerted effort, quote, at these structures. I did that inverted pyramid, right? That shows life as it truly is, with the 1% at the bottom. These are bottom feeders that are trying to feed off of us, right? This 1% with ill agendas. But in reality, the one thing is there is not a lot of coherence there. Because as we've started to see, these people are self-serving, so they'll throw each other under the bus. So it's not, that's why I say it's not quite as cohesive as people give them credit for. We just have to stay clean and clear in our own intention and thought. And like you said, people are waking up and they're saying, no, they're studying. When en masse has the public ever studied our immune systems, or what goes into vaccines, or the nature of viruses before? Until now, we are educating ourselves as a species. I think this is, again, part of this beautiful upward movement, even though it's ugly getting there.
Oh, that's so beautifully said. I love it. I was just going to mention a funny story that 20 years ago, I went to a colloquium at Stanford University. It was about the singularity, and so it was all the proponents of that. And I'll just skip I've actually blogged on it before there were blogs. I put it on my website because I thought this is fascinating and it's world changing. But the funny part was, throughout the entire event, the technology was failing constantly. So it was like hysterically funny. There'll be this singularity.
I love it.
I felt like on some level, our future selves were already in that room saying, you think so, huh? Well, you're going to have some fun. Yeah. So thank you so much. I realize we've gone over time, but I really want to thank you, Regina, for all of your excellent involvement with everything you're doing, and also with us, and for an excellent.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you for putting this conference on. This is the beginning of, I think, something that's going to be very profound and lasting. And it's a subject, like I said earlier, this is the portal to the nature of reality. Stouffer's stovetop stuffing is a portal to the nature of reality. The inquiry.
Awesome.
So thank you so much, both of you, and all the work you've done. I'm genuinely grateful for what you're doing.
Likewise. Thank you so much. And I guess we're going to take a break. Is Jerry coming back? I don't see him, so we'll go to break. Thank you.